Just answering questions with WebTech. Here we go. I'm curious about your thoughts on politics swinging to the far left. Do you think it's troublesome? I think any politicians that swing to divisiveness mode, which is why we call them far right or far left, is always bad. They do it to where they can do saber rattling to get elected. They do it so they can get the radicals to show up, because radicals will scream loudly. Every Trump camp thing shows that. You just have to not tell people who are flat earthers that the earth is round, and they'll show up and cheer for you. Just don't tell people that they're wrong, unless it's the side you don't care about. Saw a few graphs showing how far left the Democrats have gone. Tim Pool was talking about it on his channel. One of the things I'm a little concerned with right now is the polarization of people. I think crowds are a lot more harmful than this Agenda 21 nonsense. I'm looking into the politics of the European Union and the UK, France, Yellow Vest protests in the United States. Don't hear much about Canada except a rash of complaints about Trudeau. What do you think? Sorry, lots of comments this evening. I'll try to keep it short next time. And then he brings up some other things. So let's cover this really quickly. The polarization in our society is done any time any political group feels it's useful. And they do wink, wink, nudge, nudge about it. If anybody thinks that the election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton wasn't a giant stage show to try to get people divided and get people rabble-roused and get a go-no-go test out of it, you haven't worked at a opinion research company. I got to work at a place that would call you up and ask your political opinion. And it was partially to influence people because it was run by a Republican. A hardcore Republican. But he was also a real Republican. He says, I don't care who wins as long as I don't lose. And the second one is, I place bets on who wins. I need to know who's going to win. So he would deliberately push people one way or another and see, and push comes to shove, especially if you lie to them and scare them, what are they really going to do? And what you find out is people will give up every bit of liberty to have some safety and well-being and keep a stranglehold on what they've got. That last one applies to the conservatives, and the previous one applies to literally everybody. But really, it doesn't just apply to conservatives or liberals. And the more polarizing you get people, the more likely they are to make decisions without thinking about it. So you can get them to pick something, as long as it's not really going to hurt anybody, that is not based on any facts, but is based on screaming at each other. That's an election. Getting people to decide to do all sorts of other things like enact the U.S. Patriot Act, that's an example. None of that has to do with whether it's a Republican or Democrat. Conservative or liberal, it doesn't matter. What matters is, what was the real agenda, as people call it, for this to happen? You can argue in any way you want to, but in my opinion, let's just do that one real quick. It's so the U.S. government had the right to police everything just absolutely without any kind of restrictions. In case you haven't noticed it, there's always an excuse to violate your right and not require a simple freaking subpoena or a simple freaking writ or a warrant. Cops have gotten so used to not getting a judge's approval to do something that they don't even think of going to the court. Well, it's a waste of time. We'll just break the law. Oh, excuse me, push it. So when we've gotten to that point, we've already lost our liberty because you all allowed it. All you have to do is sign a petition in your area that says, we will legally compel the police to get a warrant under all conditions, no exceptions. There are no extraordinary circumstances anymore, if you want that. You know how many people are going to vote for that? Almost nobody. Because virtually nobody gets harassed by the cops, unless they're antagonistic. But it's only virtually. Sometimes people get shot on a wellness check. Pro tip, if it's a wellness check, you can't come in with a gun. You can't do anything like that. That's new speaking. Anyway, that's my opinion on it. But as for this thing, as far as the left, it's not just the left, it's the right. Both sides get more polarized when the other side is. It's a reactionary thing. The most extremist left or right-wingers, they're always there. They just get more power when you let them yell louder. You may have noticed that with the last election. And I'm talking about the midterm ones. Speaking of Israel, they have the second biggest market for tech security in the world, next to the United States. They're a small country, but extremely intelligent people, so I'm not shocked at all about how tech-savvy Israel is. Mossad is the intelligence agency. I think what everyone is going on about, actually, Unit 8200, I don't give it too much thought. I'm here for about 85 years before I kick the bucket, so no sense in being afraid of things unless something becomes a direct threat. Notice our freedom of speech is being challenged, so I think that's more worthy of our time and energy. I agree. I feel that people in the West are way too polarized, and many need to calm the heck down. Just saying, thanks for the great video. You're welcome. On that point, this polarization is created. It's an artificial, it's a manufactured controversy. Always assume that. Now, in the rest of this video, which I may chop off, I'm going to try to cover someone's request for information here really quickly. I'm curious about Agenda 21 because the last time I renewed my driver's license here in New Mexico, DMV employees were discussing meeting requirements for something, and were discussing areas that needed extensions. And I always assumed it wasn't something that was being enforced because it sounded like they were talking about Agenda 21. They weren't. In 2005, George W. Bush, Republican, allowed the Real ID to exist. What is this evil, nefarious thing? Well, according to Tea Party activists, it's the same as making us like European Union or something. It takes away states' rights. What does it actually do? It forced all the states to use a single minimum standard for both documents to get an ID and what the ID had to contain at minimum. And also made it to where a lot of minimums were there that everybody was already using, but put them into the same location. Why? Because you can watch a video of somebody saying, you don't have a legal driver's license because the driver's license is from a state I'm not occupying. This was a cop looking at an ID, couldn't identify that it was really an ID because it had a different arrangement of the components of the different information in a different position. And he had never been to that state, never seen ID from the other side of the country. So he decided that ID from like New York or maybe it was California or Washington State or whatever wasn't real. Now I want you to understand this. That's strictly caused because each state has the right to make identification cards any way they want to, and they can even have multiple types. The idea with this was to get rid of the ability for that to happen and use one standard that held all the components that were necessary, minimum, and then the rest of the space you could do whatever you want to with. And then everybody bitched about it. The deadline for Real ID went from 2008 to being postponed to 2009, 2011, and eventually to 2020. And some senators and governors and other wannabe statesmen wanted to keep that going a little further, and a couple of them decided to push it to 2021. Why? Because it sounds like Agenda 21, even though it's 2021, not 21st century. We're already in the 21st century. It has nothing to do with Agenda 21. But because a couple of states, and maybe it is New Mexico, some politicians have decided to deliberately cause it to add up to a number like 21. Why? Because it sounds scary, and they can get political clout out of it by scaring people by lying to them. I want to point out something. The current de facto national ID card numbers is much worse as far as security. The inconsistency drives every cop up the walls, and the thing is, it makes it really easy to falsify identification. Changing it's expensive. No, it's a Word file. You rearrange it. I'm not kidding. Go to the DMV and find out about it. The information that's printed on the card is on a security sheet, which is just the only thing that's always standardized. And then they have a security sheet of plastic, a laminate over it. That makes it to where you can't copy it after it's been made. Even holograms and that sort of thing. The back of it can contain all sorts of things. By keeping this standard unstandard, it makes it very likely for you to have voter fraud, illegal aliens. What? Well, yeah, it was George Bush that wanted it through, because Republicans were screaming about everybody outside of their group getting away with crap. But the minute it would be applied to them, they didn't want to do it. Oh, I want that rule only to apply to the bad people. No, in the United States, laws apply equally. I'm sorry. Yes, I'm being divisive on purpose, but liberals do the same thing. Let's go on about number 21 and talk about that now. UN Globalist National Real ID Cards. 1990, International Council for Local Government Initiatives, or Local Governments for Sustainability. We'll just call it the 1991 Sustainable Government Idea. ICLIE, or EI, is for support of the idea of making a bunch of rules that would make it really, really, really easy to have sustainable living in cities. It's a mayor's conference. Anyway, 1993 and 1992, things happened. Agenda 21 1992 was a legally non-binding statement of intent with implementation by member states remaining voluntary, not a treaty or a law under Article 6 of the United States Constitution, and the United States has the right to overrule the UN. The United Nations can be overruled by Russia or the United States or a third party. I think it's China. Do you know why? Because that's part of how the UN works. We have power over the UN. It's not the other way around. This was a get together and have a feel-good assertion, like making a law about Earth Day, which doesn't do anything. It's just a day to remember the Earth, I guess. I mean, you can refuse to celebrate it. I personally like Earth Day. It's a nice idea. It's a nice thought, but it doesn't do anything. Again, I'm going to repeat this at full-throated volume. Agenda 21 doesn't affect the laws. However, individual cities and counties, because you want state rights, can implement things that are based on the same suggestions from Agenda 21's files from the UN, or not. Well, it's a grainy thing and it's liberal and I don't like it, so you get reactionary behavior out of conservatives. Okay, it supported the International Council for Local Government, the 1990 thingy, supported Agenda 21 2 years later. Tea Party movement activists then claimed that this was not the local government efforts to expand public transportation, preserve open space, or making cities more livable, or even organizing roads to where there were less likelihoods of traffic jams. No, that's not what it is. It's a UN conspiracy to deny property rights and herd citizens towards cities. Now, who came up with that expression? Mining interests. If you make a rule that says the local city and county has the right to tell you you can't strip mine atop of a mountain off, you gotta scream it's liberals. Yeah, they paid a bunch of conservatives to show up. That's where Tea Party thing is something you implement and exploit. These are people who will, if you say the right words and implement the word Satan in it, and talk about globalism, globalists, they'll scream whatever you want them to, even if it's not in their best interest. I'm sorry, but empty-headed activists, liberal or conservative, will do this. We have them in this town. They're liberals. They're still empty-headed activists. That's why I hate them. I don't like activists, because activist is a code word for an ignorant person who screams loudly. Anyway, 1992 Bush era concurrent resolution 353, supporting implementation of Agenda 21. It went through with 40 minutes of debate, and then the Senate referred it to committee and Foreign Relations, where it died. They just put it away. It was a feel-good thought. And then, of course, the executive order by President Bush, apparently, President's Council on Sustainable Development, PCSD instead of PTSD, conceived to formulate recommendations for implementing Agenda 21 within one presidency, and it's gone. Didn't do anything. It sat around, consumed about $250,000, or maybe less than that, 5 or 6 people sitting around a table talking about, can we do anything with Agenda 21? And again, Agenda 21 is just recommending to your local mayor or your county what they can do to make things more sustainable, which usually, if you're not aware of it, sustainable living is cheaper and less complicated and doesn't have to be fixed all the time. Damn them. Next. George W. Bush, 2005, Real ID. Most of this sounds really conservative, doesn't it? Anyway, Barack Obama, UN General Assembly, set 17 global goals. Actually, it was just the UN. I'm just throwing in his name because he was in charge at the time. Sustainable development for ending poverty and hunger and all these other things you can read below, like quality education, gender equality, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below the water, and life on land, and peace and justice for all. That was literally their entire plan in 2015 that you're calling Agenda 2030, which is actually just the Sustainable Development Goals list, which is not sustainable or doable. Impractical goals for people to talk about to make themselves feel better, so they go home and act like they did something when really they just sat on their hands. That's Agenda 21 all over. But no, what you're talking about was the Real ID attempted things, and lots of states refusing to comply, including the state of Oregon. Why? We like our little tree logo a little too much. But yeah, it'd be a good idea to unify the identification. No, it's not a passport in the United States. That's a different one. You can read about that in the links below. But what you heard was them talking about that. If they said 21, it's probably a state that's going to change it to 21st. Bye.